Thank you so much. Thanks, Sylvain. Thanks to the organizers for this invitation. I'm really happy to be with you and very interested to the presentations given this morning. So I think this is really a good opportunity to discuss about tourism in the current context. So let me just share my screen, which is always somehow tricky because, well, yeah, okay. Well, I will stay like this because it does not want to collaborate. So I will present this preliminary work, which is on new challenges for tourism in metropolitan destination. This is a work that is currently carried with colleagues of the University of Westminster. So this is a comparison between two major metropolises. Sorry, I still try to share my screen. Yeah, I think that now it will work. Okay, great, wonderful. So this is an ongoing work between Paris and London. We had the opportunity to present yesterday also in another webinar, the preliminary results. And we launched also yesterday the Sustainable Metropolitan Tourism Network, which brings together researchers from the University of Paris, Panthéon-Sorbonne in Paris and of the University of Westminster, with the idea that comparison between two major tourist metropolises could be very interesting in the current context to see how, in fact, different cities in different contexts under different political governance react to this situation. So just let me present you the researchers. So I worked with this as another principal investigator, Ilaria Papalepore from the School of Architecture and Cities and of the University of Westminster, and also several co-investigators, most of them from the University of Westminster. I repeat that those are preliminary results and this work is still going on. So the aim of this work is to investigate the policy actions and plans affecting tourism that were put in place in Greater London and Greater Paris to respond to the COVID-19 crisis. The role of grassroots groups in informing this and the impacts of such policies on the sustainable development of these two metropolises. We had four main objectives, which correspond in fact to four also major questions. Which policy actions and recovery plans developed in response to the COVID-19 crisis have affected tourism in London and Paris the most? How are these policies and plans regarded by key stakeholders? Second, what creative, innovative, and experimental responses to the coronavirus crisis have been implemented by tourism actors at the grassroots level? Third, to what extent have the restrictions brought about by the pandemic altered the flows and spatial concentrations of domestic tourism? Is there evidence of a shift towards new forms of tourism? And fourth, could the COVID-19 crisis lead to reappraisal of the ways metropolitan tourism is managed with potentially positive long-term impacts? So those are our main questions. And as I said before, our case studies are London and Paris. And we are really working here in the scale of the metropolises, not in the scale of the cities. This is why we speak systematically about metropolitan tourism and not about urban tourism. The reasons for these comparisons, are that, well, of course, both are major European metropolises, and both of them are also world-leading tourism cities. Both of them are also national capitals with a very long history as tourism destinations, and also cities in which, well, metropolises, rather, in which tourism is one of the several mobilities. And it's very interesting to see how, in fact, in the current context, tourism mobilities combine with other types of mobility. So the idea is not only to take into consideration tourism mobilities, but to see how, in fact, tourism mobilities interact with other mobilities in these two major metropolises. In terms of methodology, in fact, we implemented a Delphi method between November and February 2021. And the results I will give today, again, preliminary results, come mainly from this Delphi study. We are now also carrying interviews and online focus groups with policymakers, with industry and community groups. And we are also analyzing a lot of material produced during the last months, well, during the last years, we should say, by the two metropolises, by different stakeholders. They offer a very, very important material on which we are now currently working. I will present more specifically the Delphi method on which we've been working in the last months, and again, the results of which I will present today. We carried this Delphi study simultaneously in Paris and in London. We worked with a panel of experts in each city. And in fact, we presented questions during 3 different rounds. So we started with a small number of questions sent to the stakeholders in Paris and London. And then we gave them back the answers. Well, it's a kind of, how can I say, current Delphi study. We sent them back the answers. The answers were given back anonymously, and this was, I think, something that facilitated the interactions because it freed, in fact, the speeches, and the stakeholders were able to present, in fact, their positions much more freely than if they were in a kind of institutional position. And every time, in fact, before starting the second round of questions, we had the possibility to send them back the answers of both cities. So they could see not only globally the answers for Paris, for the Parisian stakeholders, but also how, in fact, the London stakeholders responded to the same questions. And the analysis were mainly done through a qualitative methodology. The questions were open and quite thorough, and many of the stakeholders took the time to respond in a very detailed way, in fact, to the questions. So just to give you an idea of the panels, we had a panel of 9 experts for Greater London and a panel of 11 experts for Paris. I will discuss today only the results from Paris. I will not discuss the results of London. And of course, they are interesting per se, because it is very interesting to see how separately London and Paris responded to the current situation. But of course, the idea again is to work on this in a comparative way. So concerning the panelists from Paris, we had 4 panelists from state and local tourism authorities with a tourism remit, and 1 regional planning institution, 1 tourism consulting organization, 1 major cultural site, 1 tourism startup incubator, 2 from para-public organizations for the promotion of tourism, and a senior academic with tourism expertise. We organized our results in 4 main points, and really I tried today to be extremely brief in these results, because I knew the time was quite short, and because I really wanted to keep some time for the discussion and for your feedback, because I'm sure that all of you have also precise ideas about the reactions of the metropolises in which you are living or in which you are working beyond, in fact, Paris and London. So I will be very, very happy to hearing from you. So globally in Paris, the policy response was appreciated positively. which was not the case in London. But again, I will not discuss about London today. So globally appreciated positively, and what was in fact appreciated was the fact that there were interesting responses and reactive, in fact, attitude in all levels, at the national level, at the regional level, and also at the level of the city of Paris. So at the national level, thanks to specific support for the tourism sector, with the first announcements in May 2020, and then a relaunch on October 2020. The tourist professionals have been involved, in fact, themselves in the development of support measures and of health protocols, notably through an ad hoc body, the Interministerial Council for Tourism, and also for the Tourism Sector Committee. In Ile-de-France, also regional support, and this regional support came in reinforcement, both intensification and extension, in fact, of the central government measures. And in fact, the region strengthened the tools of the national state with other financial funds, but also with communication, with promotion, and also thanks to a strengthening of engineering resources. And finally, it was mobilized funds for investment and, for example, a regional rebound loan at zero interest. And also globally positively appreciated the measures by the city of Paris, since numerous aids have been granted to in order to help businesses, exemption for rent, exemption for fees and taxes, and also support for arts and crafts, support also for the social and solidarity economy, for tourism, for shopkeepers, and also some more specific measures, such as relaunch my company differently. Concerning the second point, which is about governance, here we have a kind of, how can I say, ambivalent reaction. In fact, there was a lot of hope concerning the post-COVID tourism. There is a lot of hope concerning post-COVID tourism. And in fact, the idea was really to imagine a totally different future in a city such as Paris, which of course suffers by over-tourism, well, suffered by over-tourism during the last years. Governance is a kind of complex issue in Paris, because in Paris there are different bodies, in fact, in different scales again, dealing with tourism. So all stakeholders consider that it is needed now to have a better and more effective collaboration between these different levels, because in fact there are measures, initiatives, and tourism planning in all these different levels, and this sometimes creates misunderstandings and is counter-functional, in fact. So the stakeholders asked for more cooperation and cooperation in complementarity. Obviously, this is not new, but this became more clear during COVID times. COVID times exacerbated the fact that there are some governance issues concerning tourism in Paris, and more generally concerning France, because as a remark that we quoted here, the respondents reminded that still in France, well, supposedly first world destination, tourism destination, there is still not a real ministry dedicated to tourism. And there is only a sub-secretarial level, in fact, in France, dealing with tourism issues. So some criticism concerning governance. And again, which is interesting, is to say that the COVID situation, in fact, made some of these problems, issues more visible than they were in the past. The third point is about innovation. Our question, in fact, our research tried to understand if tourism in Paris changed, if it changed during COVID, and if eventually these changes will be sustainable will in fact mature after, well, the normalization, we could say, of tourism. Well, here we really do see important changes. These changes, of course, concern digitalization. It's a kind of digital turn in Paris. Of course, this is not specific in Paris, but it's quite important to see that in Paris, even major venues, very, very important venues that attract, I cannot give specifically the name of these venues because I don't want to give the name or the site which participated in this research, but even in major venues in which we can have 7 or 8 million visitors a year, we didn't have important digital tools before COVID. So this changed, and these major venues, in fact, integrated for the very first time in their tourism history, time slots for the visits. It seems very, how can I say, very obvious, but again, this was not the case for these major tourist sites. So this concerns major tourist sites, but also it concerns smaller and more modest, I would say, stakeholders that offer more alternative tourism products and who, thanks specifically to the current situation, thanks to this digital turn, they were able for the first time to reach new markets, totally new markets. I'm speaking here, for example, about this very interesting platform, Explore Paris, which is a platform that brings together several small, very, very small size stakeholders who offer alternative tourism in Paris, mainly off the beaten tracks, in fact, tourism, and in fact, who usually targeted, well, usually before COVID, targeted visitors mainly from the city of Paris or from the Paris region. So local, in fact, visitors, not exactly, we could say, tourists, but mainly local visitors. Thanks to visits that concern, for example, street art or contemporary art or former industrial areas that are now experiencing a kind of artistic redevelopment. So specific products. And for the very first time, these stakeholders, thanks to digitalization, the virtualization of their visits, they were able to reach international tourism. And this is quite interesting because, of course, this brings new issues. Can we speak to these visitors the same way, these international visitors, the same way we used to speak to our local visitors? Of course, there is a huge language issue because all those visits were given in French. So the question now is, should we, in fact, offer these visits in other languages? So quite interesting, in fact, ideas that are coming up. And I really do not have the feeling that after an eventual normalization of tourism, this will be forgotten. I think that all these changes are here to stay in a way. And also we can give the example of the Welcome City Lab, which is an incubator specifically for tourism, which also presented and communicated a lot on innovations that came from different startups, specifically on the field of tourism. The fourth and last point is about no, it's not the last, it's the fourth point, sorry, there is a fifth one. It's about the sustainable turn of tourism. Can we really imagine that COVID will change tourism patterns? Of course, this is something that all stakeholders wish. Well, most stakeholders wish. The fact that tourism after COVID will not be the same kind of mass tourism, but that we will have different forms of tourism. And in fact, there is a kind of deception already here because several of the stakeholders who were really hoping, really expecting a change in tourism, they consider that in fact the political and the institutional support is not that important. They really wished to have more important political and institutional support. And we quote here, the pandemic has unfortunately not led to the consideration of new priorities and the implementation of new tourism policies to help develop a resilient model. So many of the stakeholders who in fact wish a different tourism for Paris are in a way very, how can I say, they experience a kind of deception and they consider that after COVID, we will find the tourism, well, business as usual. But this is a quite ambivalent attitude. And at the same time, we also attended to new forms of tourism, which will probably continue with mainly this local turn of tourism. And we'll speak about this in my next slide. So a turn for local tourism, for greener tourism, and also more experiential tourism. The idea is to facilitate in Paris and in the Paris region, thanks to new approaches, to new regulations, to a new, in fact, modus vivendi, to facilitate encounters with the local inhabitants. And in fact, what is now discussed is this separation between locals and tourists, because what in fact happened during the last months is that locals behaved really as tourists. And it was thanks to locals that tourism survived in Paris. So there is a kind of blurring. Well, of course, this blurring was observed already in the previous years, but this blurring becomes today much more important between locals and visitors. And yeah, this is my last point about tourism turns local. As I said before, due to the pandemic and the fact that specifically in a city such as Paris, it was, I mean, the decrease of tourism was about 85%, which is a huge number. And it was thanks to local customers, local and regional, and eventually, but in a less extent, national customers, that the tourism sector survived. So the professionals discovered this proximity tourism de proximité. We cannot really translate it very well in English, but we used this vocabulary, proximity tourism. So in fact, local inhabitants who take touristic products and behave such as tourists. In recent meetings with Parisian stakeholders, many of them spoke, in fact, about their own experiences and the fact that they took their bike, they went in another neighborhood in Paris, they took a hotel room in this other neighborhood, they spent 1 night or 2 nights in this neighborhood, they discover the area around there, they tasted local products, so a kind of experiential rediscovery of the city. So again, of course, by WTO standards, this is not tourism per se. We cannot define it as a tourism. However, the attitude of the visitors is in a way touristic. And this now becomes very interesting for the tourism providers, the tourism stakeholders who develop more and more this type of tourism. So for the future, panel expresses mixed feelings about this trend of local turn of tourism. The panel hopes that it may drive to changes in forms of tourism and that it will help develop tourism in less visited metropolitan areas, and also that it will, in fact, contribute to the development of new, more sustainable forms of tourism. But there is also some skepticism that the trend will last when international travel resumes. So those are very, very briefly our current findings. And as I said before, this is ongoing research. So I will be really, really happy and very interested to have your feedback on this. Thank you.